Great. Now it's also live on YouTube. I will share the YouTube link with the relevant colleagues.
Welcome, everybody, to the Dutch launch of the Human Development Report 2020, organized by the United Nations Development Programme in cooperation with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and SDG Netherlands. My name is Marijse Oosterman. I'm the Director of SDG Netherlands. SDG Netherlands connects organizations around the Sustainable Development Goals and catalyzes their joint contributions to these goals. I'm very happy to see so many participants. The fact that you are here either means that you are not capable of ice skating or you prefer to take part in this event. For all our sakes, I really do hope it's the second. I hope that you're all well, and I picture you sitting in your warm living rooms. In spite of the fact that we are all located very far apart, we really want to try to make this event as interactive as possible. So before this event, we already collected some of your questions, and during this event, you can participate through the Q&A in Zoom. In the Q&A, you can also upvote each other's questions. You can indicate to whom you would like to pose your question. And if you like, you can include your name, if you don't mind me mentioning your name. There might be too many questions. In that case, we have a team ready here to answer your questions, not live, but in the Q&A. So at this event, we will discuss the UNDP report, The Next Frontier, Human Development, and the Anthropocene. As it happens, this term, Anthropocene, was coined by a Dutch scientist. His name was Paul Crutzen, and he died, unfortunately, 2 weeks ago. I would like to share here with you briefly how his work can really inspire us today. What he did is he discovered the mechanism of ozone depletion. And he won the Nobel Prize for it. A thinner ozone layer means more people suffering from cancer and more damage to crops. Thanks to his research, it was possible to identify the problem and also to make an agreement to find solutions for this problem. This wasn't easy because it meant that whole industries had to be transformed. And also it meant sending technicians to the most remote islands in the world to remove ozone depleting substances from every last fridge. But we succeeded. And the reason that we succeeded is that every country in the world wanted this and they acted upon it. So this is the message that I would like to give to you today. Paul Crutzen's work showed us that we as humans are now dominant indeed, which means that we can create enormous problems, but it also means that we can actually understand them and address them. So during this meeting, we will have a first part in which the UNDP report will be presented, and a second part in which we will discuss how we will act upon it. For the first part, I am delighted to introduce to you the speakers. I hope we can also see them. This is Kitty van der Heijden, Director General of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also one of the masterminds behind the SDGs. It's Ulrika Moder, Assistant Secretary General and Director of the UNDP Bureau for External Relations and Advocacy. And finally, Pedro Conceição, Director of the Human Development Report Office, also at UNDP. First, I would like to invite Kitty van der Heijden to give us her opening remarks. Kitty, you have the screen.
Thanks a lot, Marisa, and welcome to all of you that are joining this session. Thanks so much to SDG Nederland and of course to UNDP for organizing this event, because I believe this is truly a very, very important report. It is a report that I think everybody should read. It should be mandatory in schools. It should be mandatory for all CEOs, for all civil servants, if not for all civilians, because it contains a central message that is as simple as it is scary. It basically says we're ruining the planet. We're destroying the natural resources on which we all depend, be it water, be it soil, be it climate or forest. We're entering the sixth mass extinction of species, and we are using the atmosphere of this planet as the global sewer for our greenhouse gas emissions. And I still find it quite amazing that as a human species in just over 150 years, without the intention to do so, stress without the intention to do so, we as mankind have managed to change the properties of an entire planet's atmosphere. Without the intention to do so. That's pretty amazing for a bunch of fur-free apes. And in so doing, we are not only ruining our own future, which is bad enough, but more importantly, we are losing the prospect of a life in dignity for poor and vulnerable communities worldwide that we have promised a life of dignity. They were least responsible. We also know that they're least capable of dealing with the impact, and yet this is where we are. And we've seen that over the past year, COVID-19 has only exacerbated inequalities that already existed prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Together with climate change, together with conflict, it's going to be so much harder to achieve what we want to achieve. I think what the report truly shows is that inequalities and environmental degradation are not separate. They are two sides of the same coin, and unfortunately, they enhance each other. Together, they are truly a very toxic combination. And if we do not use our planet in a different way, we will never be able to achieve the SDGs. We will never be able to deliver on the dream of a life in dignity for all of mankind. And, if you look at the science of all the statistics, you'd like to take your duvet over your head and go back to sleep. And I'm a pessimist by science, but I'm also an optimist of hope. So at the start, before we look into all the dire prognosis, I want to offer you three messages of hope. One is what's evident now wasn't so evident less than 10 years ago. As Marisa said, I was deeply involved in the Rio +20 and subsequently the Open Working Group for the SDGs. And yes, I know this shows how old I am, but 10 years ago when we started this, including environmental issues in the discussion around poverty eradication, wasn't taken for granted, neither by development experts who thought that, environment is something else. That's not real development. Real development is health and education and gender equality, and all of these things are incredibly important. Countries from the South thought that anything green, anything dealing with environmental issues was a conditionality. It was a luxury, an icing on the cake, something you would do once development is done. And I remember very well that we couldn't speak of including environmental issues in the successor arrangement to the MDG. So we had a track that was called, I have to look it up, The Green Economy in the Context of Sustainable Development and Poverty Eradication, which was abbreviated to GETSPD, which is remarkably close to GETSI, which is the Dutch acronym for yuck. And that was how many people in the development arena felt about anything environment. I think what we can say is that in the time span of less than a decade, most of us that are serious on development have now come to recognize that you cannot achieve human development without looking at our natural resources. So that's a massive change, and it happened in a very short time span. It gives me hope for the future. Second point is the issue around universality. It used to be that development was really seen as something that was the Ministry of Development Cooperation, or whichever it was called, and not a whole of government approach. What we see now with all these global public goods that we're dealing with, water shortages, climate change, soil erosion, that none of this can be dealt with by just development cooperation. This has to be a whole of society approach, including the private sector, the science community, civil society organizations, and the whole of government approach. We're going to have to look at, whether we like it or not, the transboundary implications of our carbon footprint, incorporating natural resource implications of a diet high in animal protein. We have to look at our fiscal regimes, the water footprint of our consumption. And so even for the Netherlands, we're doing pretty well on human development, but if we adjust for planetary pressures, we actually tumble down the ranking. And so solving these issues will require the lens that what we do here will have an impact elsewhere as well. And I think that realization will hopefully, let me put it that way, speed up and accelerate a pathway towards global sustainable development. And then last point 3, I mean, let's be honest, the COVID-19 crisis has set us back tremendously. And actually, its origin was in the natural environment, zoonotic diseases, and the rapid depletion of biodiversity. But it's also, I would say, the best opportunity we ever had to address this crisis. I'm an economist by background. Never before in the history of mankind have we in the public sector globally poured in this much money in relief and recovery programs for COVID-19. We're spending now in the industrialized world a staggering 280 times as much money as we did during the banking crisis in 2008. It's 17% of global GDP we're talking about. If we use that money well, if we're smart, if we look at that with the lens of resilience, inclusivity, and sustainability, we can keep the world of 1.5 degrees within reach. We can keep the SDGs and the dream of a life in dignity for everybody within reach. If we do it wrong, the world and mankind will suffer the consequences, not just for the next 10 years, but probably for the next 10,000 years, certainly when it comes to climate. And so using the report and the message that is in this report, that we must do it and we must do it now, is incredibly important to keep that dream alive. That dream depends on all of us, and it certainly depends on all of you listening to the colleagues that will speak after me about what they have found on the Anthropocene and how that impacts human development. Back to you, Marissa, and I will listen, look, and learn, and look forward to answering all of the questions.
You're muted, Marissa.
Thank you very much, Kitty, for sounding the alarm. Very necessary, but also for your very specific message of hope. I would now like to turn to Ulrike for her opening remarks. Welcome to the Netherlands. Ulrike, you have the screen.
Thank you, Marissa. I wish I was there and with the possibility to do ice skating during the weekend. And dear Kitty, I mean, Thank you so much for those opening remarks. I think all of us and the audience, thank you for being with us, can tell how engaged you are. And I'm also really looking forward to this discussion. And I will also repeat some of what you have said because our thoughts are so aligned, and perhaps starting to say then what a long and dark year 2020 has been. A tiny virus has really humbled the human race, threatening, as you were saying, to reverse decades of development. And Pedro and his team actually came forward with a report where we can tell that for the first time since 1990, we are moving in reverse, but there are possibilities, and I'll also get back to that. We know that scientists predicted a pandemic like COVID-19 for years because of the ever greater pressures that we humans put on nature in the name of progress. And just consider this, the total mass of things humans have made, like buildings, roads, or for that matter, bottle tops, now actually exceeds the total mass of all living things on the planet, from tiny bacteria to giant whales, according to new research. And as the Human Development Report we launched today sets out, this is the Anthropocene, or the age of the humans. I don't know how well known the concept is in the Netherlands, but perhaps the past week it has been discussed again, and we need to discuss it. Because we are in a time when humanity is waging a war against itself and our common future. COVID-19, climate change, inequality, are all connected, as you were saying, Kitty, and they are all hitting together, and societies are in trauma because of this. But it doesn't have to be this way. And as you were saying, this is a unique moment. It calls for unique conversation. And that is what we hope that we can also do and deliver with this Human Development Report. Just to take us back in history, because we're actually celebrating, because it was 30 years ago that UNDP first introduced the human development concept and the index in the global debate, ranking then all countries by health, education, and income, a proxy for the freedom and opportunities people living in those countries experience. Our human development reports, they are designed to be action-oriented, and they have actually inspired development thinking and influenced policies to put people at the center of development, looking beyond income, looking beyond the traditional economic terms. But this year, constrained by mostly pre-pandemic data, we decided, as you know by now, to try something new. And it was high time, I would say, to do so. We added countries' consumption, but also carbon footprints to the Human Development Index. And this does not mean that this is another report solely on sustainability. I think it goes beyond needs, beyond sustaining, beyond summarizing well-known policy options. It is a report about human behavior and how we can expand human development in balance with the planet, people and planet, as we say in UNDP and in the UN. The results is a less rosy, but it gives us a clear analysis of what we can call human progress. And it is only the start, and I think, Pedro, you will speak to this. It is an index that we're trying out. Plotting out the data on a graph reveals a profound insight. And we know now that there are countries that leave a minimal imprint on the planet, and there are countries with a prosperous population. But not one nation in the world sits in both camps. So look at our graphs, because this is the interesting part. No country in the world has yet achieved very high human development without putting immense strain on the planet. But we could actually be the first generation to do this right in a different way and really, develop the frontier for human development with respect of the planetary boundaries. In the graphs used to illustrate this data in the report, we have quite literally the empty box. How do we fill that box? How do we fill it with the next frontier of human development? It may sound daunting, but the way forward is not rocket science. We have the knowledge. We just need to work on incentives, on social norms, and put nature-based solutions at the center of our development discussions, our security discussions, our political discussions, a whole of government approach, as you were alluding to. And UNDP is really an agency that can be part of this together with countries as Netherlands. because we believe that this way we can really reset how people and planet interact. And we think that time is mature. As you were saying, Kitty, I mean, I have also been amazed actually by the late but still speed that the discussions are actually now much more at the center of what we discuss here in the UN setting. It comes down, as we know, to choices that leaders make. And of course, now we have an opportunity, as we say in the international community, to build forward better, to use the investments that are being made, as you also spoke about. Choices can stop the pandemic, and it can end poverty. They can close the digital divide and tackle the climate emergency. So we have a unique moment to move forward and really showcase what can be the next frontier for people and planet. On poverty, it could be, as we also have seen figures, 1 billion poor people in the world by 2030, a quarter of them due to the socioeconomic effects of COVID-19. Or we could do things differently with ambitious policy options and a deal on debt restructuring, a deal on investment in social security. UNDP has used an example where we've actually had real investments in real time during these past months. A 6-month temporary basic income for nearly 3 billion people during the pandemic could actually be equivalent to what 1/3 of poor countries paid in 2020 to service their external debt. These are the policy options that we're actually discussing if we are to discuss them seriously beyond the structures that we have in place right now. On the digital divide that we have also seen and described in our reports, we know that 4 out of 5 children are effectively out of school in poor countries in the first half of this year because of the lack of access to online learning. We could let the digital divide deepen, or we could see to that we do a once-in-a-generation effort to close it and make the investments needed. On climate, by 2100, the poorest countries in the world could experience up to 100 more days of extreme weather as a result of climate change, or we can see to that we really have a green recovery, that we work towards the implementation of the Paris Agreement with enhanced NDCs, as we are doing with the Netherlands, and UNDP is part of this, so that we can halve this suffering of people. We have choices and we need to make them. And this is, as we've said, a unique opportunity to really create an entirely new epoch. And I think the discussions that we're having with Netherlands and the rest of Europe to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to the 1990 levels, and to become climate neutral by 2050 gives us also a sign that these discussions are actually put at the center of the European Union, but many also member states across the world. Our recent strategic dialogue centered on issues like climate change and sustainable energy, with much ground for increased partnership to step up with regard to climate emissions, how we can encounter them, but also how we need to work on adaptation and investments in adaptation, and how we, as we've said here, discuss the connection between the climate action, the work that we do on biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity, and the investment in social security and the just transition that needs to be put in place. I also want to take the opportunity, you didn't mention, but Netherlands has a growing international role, reflected more recently in hosting the Climate Adaptation Summit and also the upcoming really important energy high-level dialogue. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the NDC partnership, where we have worked very closely. UNDP is actually right now in the midst of the pandemic supporting 115 countries to get increased ambitions and actionability based on these national determined contributions or climate promises that countries make. So dear friends, this is the 30th anniversary of the concept of human development. We need to change the concept, we need to change the discussion, but more than that, we need to change our actions. We have the possibility to do so. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion and to see how we can also bring not only the Dutch government into our partnership, but the broad range of actors that we know are there in Netherlands to actually make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. And UNDP was, of course, a front runner with the Human Development Index, taking it beyond GDP. And now again, you are a front runner, taking it even further and showing us exactly where the dilemmas are and the choices that we should be making. And you are right, we could make the right choices as this generation. And in fact, of course, we should, because if this generation doesn't take the required action, it will be too late. The changes, many of the changes will be irreversible. So thank you very much for your contribution. I would now like to invite Pedro to give us the highlights of the report. Pedro, you have the screen.
Marisa, thank you very much. Nice to be with all the colleagues in the Netherlands. Ice skating is not that appealing to me because I don't know how, but we'll try to keep at least my presentation short to ensure that we move quickly to the discussion so that this event is appealing enough to prevent you from going ice skating. I want to thank Kitty and Ulrike for setting up the context so well, which means that I can indeed be very brief, and I want to focus on highlighting three key messages from the 2020 Human Development Report. The first message is that the report can be seen as an invitation to look at challenges such as COVID-19 and the climate emergency really as reflections of this unprecedented moment in our history and in the history of our planet rather than separate problems. It is unprecedented because the moment we're living through, human pressures are driving change at the planetary scale. And Kitty alluded to the fact that scientists are putting forward this notion of the Anthropocene, and Paul Crutzen was the leader in making this proposal. But these changes are actually dangerous for us and all life on planet. And so the report suggests that these planetary pressures are characterized by the emergence of an unprecedented set of risks that ultimately result from the fact that, as our Secretary General put it, humanity is actually waging a war on nature. The second key message, and Kitty has already alluded to this, is that these new risks are actually superimposed in a world that is confronting very large and often growing inequalities. And when these risks materialize in shocks, they are actually exacerbating these inequalities. So if we take COVID-19, which as Kitty has alluded to, is likely to have origin in a virus that jumped from animals to humans. And we know that there's been an increase in the frequency of these diseases and that it relates also to the pressures that we're putting on planet. So to take COVID-19, we know that the economic impact has been far worse for women than for men. In part because women are overrepresented in some of the sectors that have been more affected, but perhaps more troubling because social norms about the expectations in terms of the role of women in homework and childcare seem to be reasserting themselves. And so we see many women actually pulling back from the labor force. In our report, we highlight that in a few countries there have been drops in the labor force participation of women of as much as 10 percentage points. But actually this pattern holds more broadly. So if we take a look at countries that face more ecological threats, as you see on the slide, so ecological threats are things like floods, storms, are also those where gender inequality is higher. And if we consider inequality more broadly, not only in gender, but across all the dimensions of human development, you see that the story is very much the same. Now, inequalities are also linked to gaps in consumption and in power between those that over-extract and over-pollute and those bearing the consequences. And Kitty has already mentioned this point also. Now, for some evidence, you can see on this slide that by the end of the century, the poorest countries in the world, who are the ones that have contributed the least to climate change, could actually experience up to 100 days more of extreme temperature. While rich countries, which have historically contributed the most, could actually experience 18 days less. But these 100 days could be cut in half, as you see from the blue lines here, if we move closer to meeting the aspirations of the Paris Agreement on climate change. So a central message of the report, therefore, which is the third message that I want to emphasize, is that choices matter, and what happens going forward is not inevitable and depends on the choices that we make. Now, human development is not only about people's well-being, it's also about seeing in people agents of change. Amartya Sen uses this expression that we should look at people not as patients, but as agents. And I think this third message of the report does give a sense of hope and possibility. One of the elements that we bring about to encourage people to make different choices and give them conditions to make different choices is that we do supplement the Human Development Index with a new index of planetary pressures that combines indicators of material footprint per person and carbon dioxide emissions per capita, as Ulrika has already alluded to. And Ulrika spoke of a graph. So here is the graph that Ulrika described. You see on the horizontal axis, the Human Development Index, and on the vertical axis, the Planetary Pressures Index. So if we plot the current values of these two indices for all countries, which are the blue dots that you see on the chart, you see that the aspirational space of high human development and low planetary pressures, which you see flashing at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, is now empty. So this also speaks to the universality point that Kitty also emphasized. So this is a challenge that is faced by everyone, by every country in the world. And to take us to this aspirational space, the report lays out three mechanisms to encourage people perhaps to make different choices. The first is about harnessing social norms. And I start with this because it's perhaps the most unusual in much of the policy analysis that we have seen, which is premised to a large extent that that each person is an individual island making rational calculations on how to behave. But we do know, in fact, that humans are ultra social, and the key predictor of people's behavior is what others around them do, and what people believe that others expect them to do. So as we have seen, social norms around things like using masks can change very rapidly. And so we suggest that we must now harness social norms in ways that give greater weight to understanding and easing planetary pressures. And the concrete lever to do this that we emphasize in the report is the role of education, broadly understood, and across the life cycle, as important to enhance both a sense of stewardship for nature, as well as the critical thinking that is essential for reasoned public and individual deliberation. So it's not only about teaching people, children, the skills they need to be productive in the labor market, even though that's important and essential, but also giving people this ability to critical think about the challenges that we confront. The second mechanism for change to move us in that direction does acknowledge that in our market economies, prices and regulation are essential, and they can be used to shift economic incentives. Carbon prices and the removal of fossil fuel subsidies are examples, but the report emphasizes also incentives and investments in research, technology, and innovation. In part because history has taught us that what often seems like a wonderful technological fix can bring about unintended consequences that we are unaware of. So CFCs were really a miracle technology at the beginning of the 20th century. They enabled a revolution in the refrigeration that changed the food distribution systems that enhanced the welfare of people around the world. But then Paul Crutzen found that these substances were also depleting our ozone layer. So we need to continuously invest in our ability to learn, and that's why it's important to continuously invest in science, technology, and innovation, not only to promote a specific technological fix, but to enable us to collectively learn all the time. And also it's important to look at what's happening in financial markets. Climate change, we know, will result in economic and financial losses, not only for businesses, but also households. We know that through falling values of homes in flood-prone areas, for instance, this can affect the assets of families. And governments as well. And so it's not surprising that financial regulators are requiring more climate risk assessment, and even central banks are incorporating climate risk in their macroprudential oversight of the financial system. And Kitty mentioned here the unprecedented fiscal response to the economic crisis that resulted from COVID-19. But I would add here also the role of central banks, and there's now a very active debate if the purchases that central banks are making should not take into consideration also a carbon impact or planetary pressures more broadly. We discussed this in the report. And then finally, the third mechanism for change is really looking at nature not as a constraint, as something that does not enable us to build another airport or another road, but really as a potential opportunity in advancing human development if we protect and restore ecosystems. Our administrator, Achim Steiner, often speaks of the ecological infrastructure that goes along the physical infrastructure and upon which ultimately our lives depend upon. Examples here include, for instance, investing in the blue economy, investing in restoring and protecting ocean ecosystems, which can also provide huge economic opportunities. And I'm sure this is not lost in a country like the Netherlands. So let me conclude by coming back to this point about inequalities, because as Kitty emphasized, the report is really not another report about the environment of sustainability, but really one that looks at this intersection between social imbalances, which are inequalities not only in resources, but also in power, in voice, and the way in which they are standing in the way of having these mechanisms that I described work. And interacting, therefore, with planetary pressures. I think one of the most striking findings of the report is that we estimate that the contribution of indigenous peoples on a per person basis in their role in managing forests that we know can work as a carbon sink and therefore support mitigation of climate change is roughly equivalent to the carbon dioxide emissions per person of the top 1% of the global income distribution. These are the people that are contributing, therefore, to climate change. And on the other side, we know that these indigenous peoples are the very ones that are often marginalized, if not persecuted, around the world. So these imbalances are putting people and planet on a collision course, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can make different choices, and our aspiration is that with this report, we will help signpost how to continue to advance human development while easing planetary pressures, with the aspiration, obviously, to meet the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro. You are the lead author of this report. It's a very, very rich report, so I can really recommend everybody to have a look at the report itself as well. We have 3 more minutes, and I would really like to pose a question to each of you, starting with Kitty. Kitty, as the Netherlands, we rank quite high in the Human Development Index, number 8. But if you add the planetary pressures, we drop 6 places. So what does this mean to you, and what does it mean for action in the Netherlands?
Well, it clearly shows that we have a lot of homework to do, right? And I think there are other reports like the Bertelsmann Stiftung that says we are number, I think, 9 in terms of SDG progress, and then 159 out of 166 when it comes to negative spillovers. I think what this means, and what I think the government is increasingly realizing, that this is not an agenda that belongs to the Ministry of Development Cooperation. This really requires a whole of government approach. It requires a much more holistic policy response than what we have now. It will mean how we work in cities, what we do on energy efficiency, how we work with our diets, and how we promote responsible and green choices. We're clearly not there yet. I think this government has really made a big contribution to seeing it as a more integral policy challenge, but I think we have a new government coming up. We have elections, as you know, in March, so I hope that from the next government onwards, we will see an acceleration of how we integrate the SDGs as the lodestar, if you will, also in the Netherlands, for policies across every policy domain that we deal with, because that's the only way we're going to bring our planetary pressure down as a government.
Thank you. Using the SDGs as a compass for building better, to put it in my own
Absolutely.
words. Ulrike, on the basis of the report, which one action would you recommend to the Netherlands to undertake to achieve this balance between humans and non-planetary pressures?
Well, I mean, there are many things to be done. And I just would like to say again what Kitty said, the importance of the whole of government approach. And then, of course, the possibility of an agency like UNDP really working at the center of planning with many of countries, I mean, with the presence in so many countries, and also coming with a development offer where we can then, and that perhaps answers to your question, discuss how we can move forward with policies. And then, I mean, the social norms that the report speaks to, how can we advise governments if they are to withdraw fossil fuel subsidies, for instance? I mean, that would, of course, be a possibility for them to gain fiscal space, a space that they really need right now. I mean, the socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic, they are so severe. I mean, we haven't yet seen the full consequences of the debt crisis, as we alluded to. But fossil fuel reforms in different ways could, of course, open up economic space. But then we know also, I mean, even on the European continent, what this creates with regard to social unrest. I mean, yellow vests in the streets of Paris, while perhaps in other countries, Canada, I mean, less so. So what did they do? And what can we learn from the global network where UNDP and the UN can be part of knowledge sharing when we advise governments? And here's where I would look for support, because of course, I mean, a welfare nation like the Netherlands could, you know, also have experiences both in the Netherlands, but also in the global network, how we can withdraw perhaps, you know, fossil fuel subsidies and do these kind of investments that the report also discussed with regard to social security and not only temporary basic income as UNDP has also discussed, I mean, as a short-term measure, but really building social security systems that can respond then differently to the next upcoming crisis that countries will face. So those kind of experiences and how we can use the UN and UNDP's global platforms with regard to policy advice to find that fiscal space, I think that's really interesting.
Thank you very much. I hope the issue of fiscal space will also come back in part 2 of this event. Pedro, one last and very quick question to you. Many of the challenges described in the report are also covered by the SDGs. So how do you see the relation between your report and the SDGs?
Very briefly, Marisa, in the interest of time, I would just respond by referring back to what I said at the end of my presentation. What the report aspires to do is really to help provide signposts as we move towards the SDGs. The SDGs gives us the aspiration, but they don't tell us how to get there. And the report is not necessarily the final answer, surely it's not the final answer, but it's one additional element to help us to move in that direction.
Thank you very much. We will now have a short break, 5 minutes. We'll reconvene at 3:45, and in the meantime, you will see a film provided by UNDP. Thank you very much, and see you in 5 minutes.
Throughout time, the planet has shaped all life.
The planet has shaped all life.
The planet has shaped all life.
But now, in the era of the human, we are shaping the planet.
And truthfully, we are not doing a good job at it yet. Our actions are putting a lot of pressure on the world. Just look at 2020 with COVID-19, extreme weather, and rampant wildfires. People have created this mess, but we can fix it.
Empowered people can become agents of their own destiny. The world may seem stuck in its own ways, but we can take actions to create a new normal, whether that's expanding the role of women in society or using cleaner energy.
In too many countries, fossil fuels remain the primary source of energy, but clean alternatives like solar power will help reduce our carbon emissions. These alternatives need to be made accessible and affordable without using too much of other finite resources.
And we must learn to harness the power of nature at the same time as we protect its beauty and wonder. Moving to protect, sustainably manage, and restore ecosystems in a way that promotes well-being.
Too often, the decisions of a few people or countries hurts the most vulnerable people across the world. For all of us to flourish now and into the future, we must understand that we are all connected. The choices you make impact the whole world around you.
Shaping the planet means
Taking bold steps.
Bold steps for humans to survive and thrive in this new era.
If we are going to change the world,
we need you.
We need you.
We need you, our global leaders, to take bold action now.
So welcome back, everybody, to the second part of this event. In this part of the event, we will focus very much on what the report means for the Netherlands, and in particular, what it means for the actions we can take. And for that, we have a panel of representatives from different sectors. They will each first give a brief pitch, and after that, they will answer your questions. So I would very much once again like to invite you to put your questions in the Zoom Q&A so that we can pose them to our panel members later. So I'm delighted to introduce the panel members to you. The first one is Eva Fleming, Youth Representative Sustainable Development to the UN from the Netherlands, obviously. For the sector, well, it's not really a sector, but for youth. Then Jan van Zanen, Mayor of The Hague, but also Chairman of the VNG, the Association of the Netherlands Municipalities for Local Government. Maria van der Heijden, Director of CSR, which is Corporate Social Responsibility, the Netherlands, for the private sector. Koenraad Krijger, Director of IUCNL, Netherlands, the Dutch branch of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, for the NGOs. And Marise Hazelzet, she is the Sustainability and CSR Advisor of the NVB, the Dutch Banking Association for the financial sector. The speakers will all have 2 minutes to pitch which actions they will advise to their community, as well as what kind of action they need from government in order to jumpstart the required transformations described in the report. So without further ado, I would very much like to give the screen to Eva Fleming.
Thank you very much. As the Human Development Report and the speakers before me have so clearly pointed out, we are at a moment in time in which we are confronted with many global crises, including the climate and biodiversity crises. These crises cannot be attributed to one perpetrator and cannot be solved by one hero. As UN Youth Representative, I see that my generation is one who is growing up knowing about these problems and to whom it comes naturally to look beyond borders for their solutions. At the same time, it's necessary to recognize that the disproportionate impacts, which unfortunately do hit some countries harder than others, including the Dutch Caribbean islands. These islands are becoming more prone to extreme weather events and their aftermath. And also younger and future generations who have contributed the least to global greenhouse gas emissions are being hit the hardest. So this means that we need inter and intragenerational solidarity, and that we need to expand our horizons to solve these inter and intragenerational injustices. If we want to have a just transition, we need to understand the disproportionate burden being placed on vulnerable groups and repair the power imbalances. We need to empower the youth to be the active agents of change that we can be, and we need to involve those who are most affected in decision-making. In doing so, we will create a sustainable and peaceful future in which we will leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yves. I would now like to introduce the next speaker, Jan van Zanen. Thank you very much for joining us in these very complicated times that you have been able to make the time for us. You have the screen, Jan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marisa. Thank you. And thank you, Yves. Well done, Yves. They're all, unfortunately, I could not take part in the first part of this meeting, but I want to congratulate UNDP for this new approach to human development. And indeed, any development which does not take into account limits set by the capacity of our national environment is due to fail sooner or later. Dear friends, the timing of this meeting could not have been any better. Exactly this morning, the VNG, my organization, held its General Assembly meeting, digital of course. One of the key issues on the agenda was what we as municipalities want to achieve in the coming years, and indeed what we need from our central government in that respect. Cities advocate for a much more integral approach to the various social, environmental, and economic challenges in our cities and villages, in our communities. A pleasant, safe, and healthy living environment, the transition to its sustainable energy in combination with climate adaptation, economic recovery, and social cohesion. All these challenges cannot be separated from each other. They are intertwined in so many ways. And as I saw again this morning, almost all my colleagues are convinced of that. We are the level of government closest to the citizens. We see what is needed and we want to act. We want to take our responsibility together with our communities. However, we do need the means to operate, meaning a clear mandate and sufficient financial resources. Just one example. Cities have committed themselves to the National Agreement on the Climate Accord. Since then, all cities have put a lot of effort in developing concrete proposals for the production of renewable energy. But if we want to end the use of natural gas for heating our homes, for instance, we need coordinated action at neighborhood and city level. And that is costly, and I realize that. But we won't go fast enough if the government finances only individual insulation efforts by individual house owners. We want to talk about these means to operate with a national government. We do it almost on a daily basis. Like Kitty said before, if I may quote her, the whole of government approach is just right, a quote that we could underline and agree with very much more. And I would like to thank you for having me here, and let's do it, and let's do it together.
Thank you very much, Jan, for your local perspective. Maria, may I invite you to give the perspective from the private sector?
Thank you, Marisa, and all the other speakers. As Jan said, we're all in this together. And I think Corona shows us this, but also the challenges for climate and human development. And that's quite a challenge because we have worldwide challenges and we have local governments. So we have a clear vision with the SDGs. It's very clear what we have to do, but we have to act together. So we need to have a big system change, but as a representative of the front runners from the private sector, director of NVO Nederland, I really do also an urgent apply on our role ourselves. How can we make the difference in transferring to the new economy? We work with frontrunners, and they show every day that it's possible. And with carbon pricing, with renewable energy, creating closed material cycles, reducing waste, fair labor, living wages, and fair trade. So it's possible. And I really think that all the technical innovation and solutions are there. It's more about the social innovation. How do we really transfer our mindset and behavior to a climate positive and circular economy? So transition management, from my perspective, is key. And therefore, we also need the right bullets from the government. So because we're all in this together, the government has to show courage and create a new economy with the right impact on people and planet. So the green recovery is very important. Kitty mentioned all the money that's going into this recovery due to COVID. So we have to measure that along a green path. Another important thing from the government perspective is create true prices. So we pledge for a new tax system with a lower tax on labor and a higher tax on pollution and use of materials, because we need that to create new behavior. And third, empower the private sector, the entrepreneurs who are the front runners, who show us the way. So create support for them with knowledge, finance, and support. So that's my pledge in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, also for putting fiscal issues back on the agenda as we promised in part 1. Then I would like to turn to Koenraad for the perspective from the NGOs. Koenraad, you have the screen.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to comment on this important report, which is also now showing the importance of the rest of the living world for human being and human well-beings. And I think it provides a synthesis of a multitude of studies that have emerged in recent years that are all pointing in the same directions. And to say from an NGO point of view, it is a very familiar picture. NGOs see it in their everyday work. All the issues that are mentioned, the growing inequality, the unsustainable use of nature and biodiversity, climate change, and not only in developing countries, but also in the Netherlands. And I think, frankly, that many of us here present are very familiar with this picture. So the question from the NGO perspective is, when will we act on it? And when will the necessary transformative change that we speak about for years really be embraced by government and by private sector? So it's need to switch gear. And this means not incremental steps or gradual change. It does not mean tweaking the current economic system. It means concrete action. It means bold policies, as has been chained, and it means radical change. And I think NGOs with their societal constituencies have ideas and solutions, and they're waiting to be uptaken in policy and legislation. And with the, it has been mentioned, with the elections coming up, I think we have a huge opportunity in the Netherlands to start real transformative change now and not wait for another 4 years. So to end, I have 5 concrete actions for the Dutch government or any new Dutch government to speed up transformative change. And first of all, finally, after 5 years, take the SDGs seriously and make it the basis for all government policies. Make inclusiveness and sustainability guiding principles equal to the economy. And also SDGs means progress towards one SDGs should not go at the expense of progress towards other SDGs. Second, encourage local solutions. Impact is always local. We focus also in development cooperation often very much at scale solutions, and we lose sight of the local tailor-made solutions and the local ownership of solutions, very importantly. Third, redesign the level playing field for the private sector through rules and regulations. Voluntary cooperation is not bringing us enough at the speed we need. So also no trade agreements without binding terms, and provide full support of the UN binding treaty on business and human rights as a Dutch government. Fourth, use public money for activities that speed up progress towards the SDGs and stop using it to stimulate or support economic activities that impede on the SDGs. And finally, for nature and biodiversity, take it seriously, more seriously than before, and translate the new global biodiversity goals and the European biodiversity strategy into ambitious goals and measurable goals and commit to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Konrad, for your words, but also for the picture that we see behind you, which is also very telling and frightening. Next, I would like to introduce Marise to speak for the financial sector. Marise, you have the screen.
Thank you, Marisa, and thank you, UNDP, for the very good study you conducted. I was myself very inspired by the scope of the study, and I hope it will have the impact that we all need. You mentioned that planets used to shape humans, and now humans shape planets. That has a lot of negative consequences, as already has been addressed by various other speakers. But it also has a positive element because it means that we are in control. And we have to choose between the old normal and the new normal. It has already been stated. We can now, with this pandemic, choose for a new economy, a greener economy, a green recovery. I was very pleased to see that the financial sector has been mentioned throughout the report. And it provides a very good description what the activities of the financial sector can be. I see two roles. One is providing financial means to clients, the members of Maria, for instance, and to really assist them in the transition. We therefore also committed to a climate commitment in the Netherlands, where the banks, but also the insurance sector, pension funds, and asset managers are going to measure their climate impact in their portfolios and set up action plans to align with the Paris Agreement. And the special thing in the Netherlands is that we don't do this alone. I think it's also been mentioned in the study that all actors are involved. And Jan van Zanen, you already mentioned the VNG and that you're looking into how you can have a more coordinated approach. So I also would like to ask you a question maybe later on what the financial sector can do at such a local level. But in this climate commitment I was referring to, we are together with the Ministry of Economic Affairs and of the Ministry of Finance, which makes it very interesting because we can have discussions what challenges are there with financing the transition and how can we solve that. So I would like to stress that the government also can do various things. I heard already incentives. As the financial sector, we're also very much in favor of carbon pricing because we believe that that gives the right incentive to have a very not a very abrupt transition, but a transition that goes in various phases. We're also at the moment conducting a study under the platform of sustainable finance of the Dutch Central Bank on CO2 prices that could maybe be of any use for the future. And secondly, I would like to stress that the government can also set clear transition paths, like an obligation that has been required for the real estate sector of a Label C obligation for energy efficiency. That has helped a lot. At last, I'd like to say that the financial sector can also measure their own impact, so the climate and environmental related risks in their own portfolios. And the supervisors and the central banks can play an important role, as already been addressed in this webinar. Unfortunately, there are a lot of challenges still in that area as well, so we need to have more comparable data. And that's something that we really have to look into, and we can work together with the government and the central banks and the supervisors to look into how we can have more comparable and reliable data. And at last, I like the conclusion also of Maria, that we also have to change our mindset. And I think we can all make a change, and we have to start with ourselves as a sector And I think the Netherlands can be a very good example how you can collaborate together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marisa, and also thank you for posing questions to the other panel members. I will pick up the one for Jan later, but first I'd like to go back to Eva Pedro mentioned that one of the very important conclusions of the report is that education should play a major role. So my question to you is, and this is actually a question from the audience, so I'm just going to read it for you. What key changes need to be implemented in education to equip future leaders for the required transformations?
Thank you for that question. I think it's very important that involving youth and youth participation is seen as an approach to solving these problems, and it's not it's not just something to check off. It really is sort of an approach to solving the issues that we were talking about earlier. And I think that empowering youth to be part of decision making starts with education. So that's why it's so important that youth are getting education that relates to sustainable development and in which they learn about the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis. Actually, with the NDC partnership, which looks at the nationally determined contributions and climate action, we just concluded a report that presents a strategy based on a worldwide youth consultation on how youth want to be involved in climate action and decision making. And actually, one of the recommendations that came out of this worldwide youth consultation, no matter which region we looked at, is that education is a priority for youth. And some of the more specific recommendations that youth felt were priorities for them or were obstacles when engaging with their local or national governments is that in education, young people have to be equipped with the skills for a sustainable future on the one hand, and on the other hand, the content of the curricula also has to keep being updated to match the knowledge we have about the crisis that we're in, so that youth really come out of education and hopefully will also continue a lifelong path of education to be able to respond to these challenges that we're facing now and in the future.
Thank you very much, Eva. Jan, if I can come back to you, because I have 3 questions for you. One is from the audience, so I'm just going to read it to you. How does the perspective of the report relate to how Dutch municipalities engage with the SDGs, and how can we support citizen engagement for the SDGs in the Netherlands? And I think that ties nicely with the question from Koenraad, which is how can we encourage local solutions? And finally, the question from Marise, which was how the financial sector, what the financial sector can do for the local level. Jan, you have the screen.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for all your contributions. First of all, I think that on a local level, the impact is the most, you could say, the most endurable. It was just like what Koenraad said, and I'm proud, and I'm sure it's not enough according to Koenraad, but I'm proud that almost now, I think 100 local communities, local cities, so municipalities, and 100 is over 352 in total. They call themselves and they work as municipalities for global goals. They're very active, do it in different ways. And as a national association of all those municipalities, the VNG, we try to stimulate, to make them all member on our meetings and, and expertise, and to inspire them to continue and to accelerate, and also to make a kind of new movement from the bottom to make in region and also national government more active on this issue and these issues. Like in those 100, or I think there are even more cities, they have in their coalition programs, they have the SDGs as a point of where they measure all their actions with. But on the national level, that's not yet the case. Yesterday, I had a talk with Minister Kaag, and actually she's also joining in the elections, the national elections. And she said the new coalition or the new cabinet should have the SDGs within their framework of the actions. So I hope that also on the national level that will continue. And encouragement goes with the youth, like Ife, on schools, education, and we should continue. And I know it's step by step, but being a representative of local government, I cannot move faster only by telling and by encouraging and hoping that then the idea comes over and my enthusiasm and my energy. Then the third question of Marise, I would like to address, I would like to mention first that, for instance, BNG, Bank der Nederlandse Geiten, it's one of the banking institutes already, and maybe they can do more, but that's an example. They invest in sustainable public buildings, you know, to make them more sustainable. To you, I would like to say, and for sure, again, on a local level, please finance or try to finance new initiatives at a local level, create some support from the private sector. Maybe you can explain to the private sector the mystery of the SDGs, how profitable they are on the long run, and create new coalitions, because sometimes we have different views, but we don't know how we can help each other. So please try to support local initiatives, new coalition, to bring this message further. And now we have the new approach or suggested approach by UNDP. I think it would help. So you would be very welcome to join the company of the local governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. I have a follow-up question for you from Linda Johnson. The SDGs are hardly ever referred to in ongoing election campaigns. How can this omission be rectified in the last few weeks before the elections?
I'm not sure about that. I didn't see many debates yet because of Corona and because of all the other, you know, things that disturb the election that was made in the head probably of the campaigners of those political parties. But I'm sure that the SDGs, the agenda, the perspective, the international connotation it has, and it's also to me, it is a kind of language that you can use. I'm sure the SDGs will be within the campaign, and if not within the campaign, they will surely be debated when a new cabinet starts. And I also, because I'm going to be there talking to the people who are going to make the new cabinet. We have in the Netherlands, we have an information round, they call it. So the makers of the coalition, I will talk to them, and I will tell them also about the SDGs, that it could be very inspiring, whatever the new coalition will be, that they use the SDGs as a guiding agenda and an aspiration model, you could say, an inspiration model.
Thank you very much.
Don't give up, Linda. Don't give up.
Don't give up, Linda. Also, so especially for Linda and Jan, and maybe also Minister Kaag, we have developed together with many other organizations a petition to ask for a sustainable coalition agreement, specifying that it should use the SDGs as its framework. And what I find fascinating is that this is already happening at the local level, like you just told us. So now it's high time for our national government to pick up this challenge as well. After all, the SDGs were agreed already 5 years ago. Still, we have no national plan to translate them into national goals, let alone to develop a strategy to actually achieve them. So thank you very much for that, and I hope you can carry your petition with you to all these important people that you will be talking to. And Linda, if you like, you can sign up to this petition. Just go to the website Campagne voor een duurzaam regeerakkoord. It's in Dutch, sorry. Let's see, for our next question, I would like to turn to Maria. Maria, I have a question for you from Dylan Wijnbergen. Hi all, what tips do you have for businesses in general to start working on the SDGs? let's say the first step needs to be searching for the relevant SDGs for your company. And then, Maria, you have the screen.
Yeah, thank you for this question, Dylan. I think the most important topic, if you relate the SDGs to your business, is to look at the core of your business. So look at the core activities and relate the SDGs that most influence your core activities. So if you're in, for example, a water company related to water, to SDG, well, I don't know all the numbers, but so related especially to the core, and then see how it influences other SDGs as well. Koenraad mentioned it also, and I think it's very important. Also think about the positive impact on one SDG can also have a negative impact on the other. So make sure that your total contribution is, of course, positive, but also look at maybe the downside to other ones. But most important tip is to relate it to the core activities. Yes, that's my most important tip.
Thank you very much, Maria, for that. We get many questions along these lines, so I'm really looking forward, Maria, to working with you to help people to get through these first steps. I know that other organizations are also working on it for the private sector, such as Global Compact the Netherlands. So there is a lot out there. If you want to know more, just contact Maria or any one of us. I would now like to turn to...
Maybe yes. I can add that there are a lot of examples already. So please, what we also do is matchmaking as CSR the Netherlands. And of course, we work together with Sdg Nederland to do matchmaking and to bring, one has a question and the other one has a solution. So matchmaking between enterprises and entrepreneurs is one of our tasks. So yes, absolutely feel invited to connect.
Thank you very much, Maria. I now have a question for Koenraad from the audience, so I'm just going to read it to you. Koenraad, the report mentions nature-based solutions. Are they going to help us, and how? And what kind of solutions should we think of in the context of the Netherlands?
Yes, thank you. Well, the good thing is nature-based solutions is basically to use the force, the tremendous force of nature, rather than to fight it. And at many instances, also in the Netherlands, we have a big history in fighting the forces of nature. But also in the Netherlands, we have in the past, I say 5 years especially, but a little bit before 10 years maybe, we have discovered to work with the force of nature. Some examples, for example, a very old one, which is the Amsterdamse Waterleiding Duinen. It's a nature area which is used to filter and store clean drinking water. Whereas in the rest of the world, people would put a factory to clean water, for example. Another one is we have recently, in the past 10 years, given space to free-flowing rivers. We are a delta in Europe, very important delta, and very big international rivers come into the sea here. And we have allowed the river to move and use the ecological dynamics. And we are profiting now at this moment, since the river level is very high, that this water can move into the ecosystem. This is good for biodiversity, but it's also a very cheap and cost-effective way of dealing with big issues. So instead of using iron and concrete, use nature.
Thank you very much, Koenraad. And it's very hopeful that sometimes things that may look like dilemmas are in fact false dilemmas, because we can work with nature instead of against it. You might be hearing a siren now. This is Amsterdam. Marisa, I would like to turn to you for a question. I'm just going to read it because it's from the audience. What can the financial sector do to ensure illicit financial flows via the Netherlands from elites in developing countries are stopped and go back to these developing countries in aid of sustainable development. Kitty, I think you're also still with us in the background. I think it might be helpful if you could also address this question in your closing remarks, but first I will give Marisa the floor.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's a very good question, I have to say. So the question is, what can banks do to? What I understand is that we're talking about tax evasion, I suppose.
Yes, and illicit financial flows, which could also take a different form from elites in developing countries, and stop those flows and make sure that those instead are invested in those countries themselves.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that banks conduct anti-money laundering. So they do they conduct where the money is coming from. I find this also a bit of a question for the government. I think where how they can engage with the other governments to control those financial flows better. So I would say that there is a certain level of responsibility for the financial sector, but at some point also the government can play a role in this.
Thank you. And I have another, thank you for answering this very difficult question. I have another question for you. What are the main technology and innovation sectors aligned to the SDGs that are considered priorities in the financial sector?
Yeah, so technology is a big part, I think, in the energy transition. As the Dutch Banking Association, I cannot say that there are certain areas that have the biggest priority, because that's an individual decision of each bank they can make themselves. I can state that there are a few methodologies like PACTA that's looking into what kind of methodology, what kind of technologies are needed for companies to make their business models more in line with the Paris Agreement. So that's actually what I would like to say to that question.
Thank you very much, Marisa. Ife, I have another question for you from the audience. So I'll just read it to you. We have to redesign education on the basis of a new content. We still base it on the curriculum of the past, ignoring the effects, while we should start from scratch to redefine the meaning of education. So I think the question is, do we need a complete transformation of education and the curriculum? Ife, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marisa. I think what's really interesting, what we saw, especially before COVID with all the climate marches, is that there were so many young people out on the streets, and we know about climate change, we're concerned about it, and it's not necessarily because this is what we're being taught in schools. So in so many ways, Dutch young people are already accessing information to understand what climate change means. And they're also acting on it. So I think for me, the question is really, how can we, with, of course, the internet, and also now in times of COVID, it has so many potentials to sort of educate ourselves, and how can we make sure that the education matches, keeps up with what young people are already learning by themselves. And also, I think this links also to making sure that the information that we base our climate change knowledge and other sustainability issues on is accurate. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the sort of basic knowledge on so many sustainable development issues that young people already have, and really work in partnership with youth to create curricula that fits the level of their knowledge, and also the level of knowledge that we need to work on a sustainable future. And I think so here it's partly what do we learn in schools, but it's also in the report that I mentioned earlier, the youth engagement plan, it also really shows we need to look at skills. So how can we equip students with the skills for a sustainable future? So for example, I think that also comes back to critical thinking and being able to verify information. And once we can link all of that together, I think that's really an education program for the future in partnership with young people.
Thank you very much, Eva. I wanted to say, I wish I was still your age and could go to school, because it sounds so much more interesting than what we have than what we got. But Konrad, I have another question for you, please. I'll just read it. The renewed Human Development Index includes consumption and carbon footprints of countries. Is this sufficient for having a complete image of how countries are doing in terms of their planetary impact? Are we measuring our impact on the planet well enough here in the Netherlands? Konrad, you have the screen.
Okay, well, measuring carbon footprint is, of course, very, very important, not only by countries, but also by companies or by municipalities. And the good thing is, and the very promising development is this is really taking off, this awareness of carbon footprint. And this is, of course, has to do with the big attention on the effects on climate. Having said, the footprint, as we call it, on or our impact on the planet is, of course, much more. A very easy one to understand, of course, is water. Many things that we do have a huge impact on water, but also biodiversity, which is difficult, much more difficult to measure because it's a complex system, but it's not less important, as we have seen in this report. And there's many more. So actually, the planet is more complex than just climate. And therefore, we also think it's important to line up the policies aimed at, for example, climate mitigation, CO2 reduction, to line up with nature conservation and nature-based solutions, but also water conservation, drinking water. So maybe perhaps for people who are interested more, there's a very interesting concept developed by the Stockholm Resilient Institute, which is called Planetary Boundaries, which very nicely sketches the complexity of what we call planet, and what we simplify in this abstract term of planet, but which is the whole ecological system that is needed for the planet to function.
Thank you very much.
Oh, maybe just, sorry,
yes.
Can I just add one thing about measuring our footprint? I just want to mention that with the Planbureau voor de Leefomgeving, the Global Environmental Agency, we have a worldwide renowned institute in measuring impact on many different important factors. And I think we can make much more use of the fact that we have this renowned institute within our borders and also measure our impact. So actually, yes, we are quite good at measuring our impact. The only thing is we make, in my view, not so much use of it as we could.
Thank you very much, Konrad. And maybe in relation to this question, a question to Pedro. Pedro, I hope you are still there, and otherwise maybe Ulrike can take it up in her closing remarks. If you look at the Human Development Index in combination with the planetary pressures, it strikes me that rich countries are mostly in the top and the poorer countries are at the bottom, even if you include planetary pressures. So it seems that somehow there is a weighing factor between human development and planetary pressures that weighs human development more than the planetary pressures. Is this a correct interpretation, or are there other reasons for the ranking playing out this way? Pedro, if you are still there, you have the screen now. Otherwise, maybe Ulrike can take it up later.
I'm here, Marisa.
Excellent, thank you.
Very, very carefully to the fascinating discussion and learning a lot. So I'm also grateful for this opportunity. So what happens with the adjustment for planetary pressures to the HDI is the following. Countries with low and medium HDI, Human Development Index, have a very small adjustment, which implies that they are not putting that much or contributing that much in terms of planetary pressures. As we move towards the high and very high levels of the Human Development Index, what we observe is that gaps start to open up, which means that there are some countries with relatively high levels of human development that put a lot of pressures, and others with the same level of human HDI that put relatively low pressures. So the way in which we interpret this evidence and this adjustment is by giving an indication that it is possible. Once again, it's not inevitable. Even though no country has achieved, has reached the aspirational space of very low planetary pressures and very low human development index, and we discussed this in the report in some detail. If you look at changes over time, dynamics, you see that there are some countries that are moving in that direction. They haven't reached the aspirational destination, but moving in that direction. So we suggest that the interpretation of the PHDI should be planetary adjusted human development index should perhaps be seen as an incentive for change, for positive change in the way I just described.
So a follow-up question, would you say that if you would turn it upside down, if you would have started with the planetary pressures and from there adjust for the Human Development Index, would that have changed the ranking? Would we have seen, for example, some poorer countries more at the top levels of the ranking?
Not really, because the adjustment is a product of the two, so it would be symmetrical. But I think it's important to emphasize this idea that we are not ditching this people-centered importance, which is at the core of the human development notion. In fact, what we are emphasizing is that our human development, which is about expanding choices ultimately for people, is already being narrowed today for many people around the world, especially many that are already in vulnerable positions, and might be foreclosed for everybody in the future. And I also want to emphasize, linking up to the discussion, I think that as many colleagues have emphasized, there's a lot of awareness about climate change, which is very positive. Aoife mentioned the role of just, there's so much information that even if you're not taught in school formally, you pick it up. And actually, young people have been essential in social mobilization around climate change around the world. So we owe them a debt of gratitude. In the financial sector, we also heard from Marisa that it's already being incorporated. Financial regulators, central banks, and the Dutch central bank has been actually a leader in this area around the world. But the report suggests that climate change is just one of the risks we confront. There's a broader story here in the background that we need to pay attention to. And once again, COVID-19 might be the canary in the mine that is alerting to the kind of risks that we are confronting if we don't look at planetary change in this more comprehensive way. And the SDGs actually give us that roadmap of the different elements that we need to look at. So I think that if we look at the messages of the report in conjunction with the SDGs, we can actually have a very powerful integrated framework on which to act as individuals, as governments, as civil society, as businesses.
Thank you very much for the very clear clarification. Maria, I have a question from the audience for you. How do we address the relatively big power over human development of some of the large companies globally? And I think this ties in nicely to the remark made by Koenraad, I think it was, that we need more rules for the private private sector. Maria, would you like to respond to that? You have the screen.
Yeah, to be honest, I fully agree with with due diligence, for example. How do we affect with in our supply chains? How do this affect people in other places in the world. So I fully agree that the private sector is responsible for their way of acting and doing. And the more transparency, the more I like it. I really, I'm in it with you that this is really necessary. So we pledge also for impact reporting, impact on people and impact on planet. And we even pledge for this to have it in the legislation and the rules in the Netherlands. So of course, there's always this issue that we have to conquer in the world with all the other countries and with all the other companies. But as the Netherlands, we are also very innovative. We do a lot of new businesses, a lot of innovation. So let's be innovative on this as well. So I'm fully in that. And to be honest, from MVO Nederland, we really do lobby on this kind of topics to the government in the Netherlands, but also in Brussels. Yes.
Thank you very much. Then I have a question that maybe all of you would like to respond to, and then also take the opportunity to make some final remarks that you might want to make. So I will put the question out there now. How do we get this information and mindset out of our SDG bubble? So Jan, could I first turn to you, because you have already spoken to this issue? Could you elaborate on that, please? Jan, you have the screen.
Thank you very much, Marisa. I think to continue to take care, to behold and be strong, even when I watch this screen, then I see a new coalition, of course, NGOs, local government, the youth, the future, the finance sector, and the binding together of the entrepreneurs, just like swimming. That's what Maria does every morning, I know. But this new coalition, tell it, be brave, give good examples. And to me, the secret always would be, and I talked about mystery before, answering the question of Marisa, make it easy for people, make it self-evident. No intellectual thresholds, don't make it too difficult. Just let people from very young be aware that we want to live on and that we should not take more than the earth has, and tell it and don't moralize, but just try to convince and give good examples and try to make innovations to make it easy for people. So don't give up. It's worthwhile telling, and I will continue to do so until I die, and that's a long way from now.
Thank you, Jan, and I really appreciate that you mentioned that we are here together with so many different sectors that are really ready to cooperate on this. So we have a great opportunity there. Did you want to make any other final remark? Although this sounded already like the perfect final remark.
Yeah, final remark for now. And otherwise, and I know there is a chat question for me that's not being asked, but I will tell you that also at the Antilles, we are working together. They are a member of the VNG, and we also talk. I visited them 2 years ago. We talked about the SDGs, and also now in the COVID recovery program, there is talked about a more sustainable form of help. And for instance, St. Martin joins the SDG coalition. That is my final remark. Then I have answered the not asked question.
Yes, well, thank you very much for that, for picking up on that question. Eva, could I please turn to you to give your thoughts on how we can get out of this bubble?
Yes, I think that the most empowering thing to do for youth is to be part of decision making. And I think once you're part of decision making, you feel ownership of the world around you and of the community you're in. So I think really seeing youth as a critical stakeholder in transitioning towards a sustainable future is and making sure youth are part of decision making, also in formal structures, I think is the for youth and the future is the best thing we could do.
Thank you very much, Eva. Did you have another final remark to make, or are you good for the moment?
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marise, do you have any ideas on how to get out of this bubble?
I think how we're sitting here together is already the perfect example. And as I already mentioned earlier, it's quite special that we are in the Netherlands, maybe because we're also in a small country, but that we're collaborating like this, that as the banking sector, we're speaking on sustainability with the Dutch Central Bank. We're speaking with Maria van der Heijden, with the entrepreneurs. And I think we should continue that dialogue. What's needed, and I already stated before, is that the government sets very clear transition paths. And I think that the study of the UNDP already provides a very good base, what can be built further upon. And then the financial sector can, with the companies, further implement those transition paths, and that we hopefully will reach the goals we set, because we have to keep in mind that we have to reach those.
Thank you very much, Marise. Kitty, I know you will also be giving the closing remarks, but maybe you would want to chip in on this issue of how to get the information on this report, on the SDGs, the strategies to deal with these issues out to a broader audience, to break out of our bubble. Would you like to share your thoughts on that? Kitty, you have the screen.
Look, I don't think we need to get out of our bubble. I think we need to get others in our bubble. So my plan is to get everybody to join this bubble, because there simply is no other future. If we're serious, not just about delivering the SDGs, but about economic growth writ large, including here in the developed world, we're going to have to take the SDGs as our lodestar. How do we bring them in? Well, there was one thing that I think Maria mentioned, which to me is incredibly important. This is not an agenda that has anything to do with idealistic or moral motives. It is not about charity. This is about the survival of the planet and mankind.
Pontus, kan du stänga dörren?
But more importantly, it's simply an economically rational decision. The only growth that we're going to ever have is going to be sustainable growth, is going to be a growth that weeds out inequality and brings sustainability closer to us. All other growth pathways, we've seen it now. We are reversing our growth. Look at what's happening with COVID-19 pandemic, because we haven't taken care of our nature, because we aren't doing the right thing. We are paying a hefty price for this. The only medicine to do this is to prevent further damage to the planet, which means investing in the SDGs, making sure that we address both inequality as well as the green dimension. And that's simply not a choice. It's something that you have to do if you're serious about survival and about growth as a company, as a government, at every level. So let's not break out of the bubble. Let's enlarge the bubble, bring everybody in. It's the only future we have.
Thank you, Kitty. That's a very clear message. And it does sound better than breaking out of the bubble, just bringing everybody together within the bubble. Ulrike, would you also like to share your thoughts on how to bring more people into our bubble? I should phrase it correctly now. Thank you.
Happy to. No, and once again, I mean, I think we have spoken about, the past years where something has happened with regard to the international discussion. But of course, I mean, in order to bring more people into our bubble or break out of the bubble, whatever we call it, we need to speak to people in a way that engage them. I think a lot of you have already alluded to this. And Jan, I would say, I mean, listening to you and knowing, of course, somewhat, what's happening in Netherlands, you should also leverage, the UN and make full use, because we need a strong voice in the UN that can bring, these discussions at the forefront. So, I mean, you should all of you think about the UN and UNDP as your platform. Recall, as I used to say, the charter, we the peoples. I mean, it's really, this is what the SDGs is about, to bring in a variety of actors. Just some quick comments. I mean, with regard to young people and decision making, this is also interesting, Eva, because when we speak to the representatives on climate, for instance, the youth representatives that come from member states, they really call also for concrete action. and have a lot of ideas. So they want to speak reform of fossil fuel subsidies and really, really concrete things. So this is also quite interesting to see the way it happens now in a very different way. So yes, young people more at decision-making tables, because not only to represent, but actually because you bring concrete ideas. You're on top of things in a way. And then I was thinking also, and I don't know if Peter is still with us, but Konrad, with regard to your reference also to the Stockholm Resilience, Institute and the index of the planetary boundaries and the description of that. I mean, of course, if we were to bring into the upcoming index, this is an experimental index, also other aspects with regard to the planetary boundaries, I mean, it would look different. I think this comes also to your question, Marisa. I mean, why does it look the way it looks? I mean, of course, we can make more, put more data into the system, and then the index will continue to shift and it will tell a more true story. Maria, you spoke about impact, and impact investment has been part of the conversation. I would really like you to have a closer look at an instrument that we're developing also with Dutch engagement called the Std Impact. So maybe we can send that to you afterwards. It's really moving forward in an interesting way, and I think it can be an important instrument doing what we have talked about here, and that is not to only look at one sector of the SDGs, but actually the entire SDG alignment with regard to impact investments. This is the first tool that we're bringing forward. It's part of also the SG's initiative for sustainable investments, a group that he's leading, the global group of impact investors. So that could be interesting for you to know. And then, I mean, in general, I mean, as I said, really, I mean, bring forward good ideas and use and leverage the UN platforms, because we can also bring these ideas at the forefront in discussions, but also try them out. We spoke about the importance of local solutions. At the end of the day, I mean, politicians need to take decisions in their countries, cities need to take decisions in their cities, and so on. So yes, solutions are local, but if we can use the UN platforms and leverage also ideas and solutions and share them across, I think we can make change happen more faster than we've seen up until now. And really the balance between the increasing inequalities and the green restructuring needs to happen. And this is why I also made the example of finding that fiscal space through policy change with regard to fossil fuel subsidies, and then bringing the opportunity to do these investments in people. So it's really people and planet. But any day, I mean, please look for support from us, and we're happy also to see to that you get the right contacts through UNDP, because we're very much at the center of these discussions in the UN.
Thank you very much, Ulrike, Maria, and Konrad. Could I also invite you to very briefly comment on how we could bring more people into our bubble, and maybe if you have a final closing remark to share that with us? Thank you. Let's start with Konrad. Konrad, you have the screen.
Thanks. Well, I'm already. I mean, we work with many NGOs, and they have their constituencies, and I think there's tremendous power in society already that can be used and just needs to be nourished and guided. And I think it's also a very strong signal that in the Netherlands, the most power comes from civil society organizations and local governments at this moment when it comes to the SDGs, together with front-running companies under the CSR Netherlands framework. So there's a huge amount of driving bottom-up, I would say, ideas, energy, can-do mentality. And I would really call upon the new government to foster that, to fuel that, and to work with society and indeed include youth. I mean, we are now also involved in organizing election discussion debates among parties, and where you can see that youth is perfectly capable, is well organized to participate at this point. So I find that very hopeful. And my last remark, I just want to mention that there will be a special report being launched on the 1st of March on SDG 10, so inequality, and SDG 15, life on land, together spotlight report on how we are doing and how the way forward would be. Thank you.
Marisa, we don't hear you.
Ah, Maria, but you guessed rightly. I'm giving the floor to you. How do we get more people into
you.
our bubble? And also, if you have any
enlarge
final
the
remark,
bubble.
briefly, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enlarge the bubble. What we did the last few months is a campaign for the Minister of the New Economy. And we invited our network to, mention yourself as a possible new minister. And what we saw was we had 200 candidates, and it was not only about the candidates, but what was really very nice, I think, is that people think about the politics and also their
Kunnen wij de chat nog even openhouden en die vragen beantwoorden voor Kitty? Oh.
No problem. And also their voice to the government and their influence. So I really like this session as well, because we're all in this together. I started with that. We have to connect. And we also have to make it attractive to enlarge the bubble. So communication and marketing and also more the psychology perspective is, I think, very important to enlarge it. So that's my final remark. And thank you for being here with you.
Thank you very much, Maria, and sorry for interrupting you. We get too many questions, so we are trying to deal with that here. We can't pose them all, unfortunately, but we will try with our team to answer the questions in the Q&A. Because now I would like to turn to our speakers from the first part to make the closing remarks. Ulrike, if I could first turn to you, do you have any final closing remarks, maybe also responding to some of the issues that were raised during part 2? Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. No, I think I took that opportunity just a while ago, and really interesting, as Pedro said, to be able to follow this conversation. I mean, I'm not surprised at all. I know that there is a lot of engagement and knowledge in the Netherlands, and as I said, I really look forward, to the continued engagement, and that Netherlands can really also bring these discussions at the forefront, using the UN, the possibility to leverage aligned priorities. But also, as we have seen throughout this discussion, I think that there are many possibilities to bring new ideas to the table, how we do things differently. I mean, the toolbox needs to be improved. We have spoken about carbon tax, and many of the things we're discussing, they also need a way to become, real policies on the ground. So I think here's where we would also like to continue to have a close relationship with Netherlands and with a variety of actors that we have on this call, but also beyond. And we also want to take part of the need also that we have identified here at the end of the conversation to share this more broadly. And UNDP is actually about to start a campaign this spring that we think can actually also speak to a wider audience of people who are interested, but perhaps not so much into the details, and that they can understand that these possibilities that we have spoken about, that it's actually possible to both bring about change with respect to people and planet are there. So yeah, thank you so much, and looking forward to continued discussions, but not least also ideas and solutions and initiatives on behalf of the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, and please keep us in the loop for this campaign. This sounds exactly like what we need. Kitty, can I give the floor to you for some closing remarks? I will read to you some questions that we got specifically.
You're expecting me to answer all that?
Yes.
All right.
I know that you can do it, Kitty.
Here we go.
Okay, one is about nature-based solutions. Shouldn't we make more resources available to offer those to least developed countries? The other one is on the 100 billion in the Paris Agreement that was pledged for adaptation and mitigation. What did the Netherlands earmark, and how are we going to put this pledge to use? There was a question on mental health. There's a lot of emphasis on physical health, but shouldn't we also pay more attention to mental health? And finally, no, I think I'll let it go. There were also many questions posed to you by the panelists, so I suspect that you have quite a long list. And I would like to give you the opportunity to go through each and every one of them. Thank you, Kitty.
Oh God, no. Well, I'm not going to bore people to death. I know I am at least here in the Netherlands. I know Ulrika and Pedro, that's not for you, but I am between you and a good drink on a Friday evening before you hit the weekend and perhaps enjoy the last bit of sunshine and get on your skates. Let's see. Let me start with the questions you asked just now on nature-based solutions. Look, this is incredibly important for us. I think it's a complete win-win. It is very often cheaper. It is very often more sustainable, and it is very often also bringing co-benefits in many dimensions, not just low carbon, but also in terms of biodiversity. It brings co-benefits often in cultural diversity. Nature is something that most people truly value. So it brings benefits from many dimensions. If you look at climate adaptation, for example, for us, the investment in nature-based solutions, why do we do it? Well, first of all, because of everything I just mentioned. But if you look at the rate of return on that investment, it's 1 in 5 to 1 in 9. It simply is a rational economic choice, right? So investing in nature is not, again, something that you do charity because you like the birds and the bees. If you care about the best bang for your buck, take a fiscal perspective, if you will, it's the best solution you have, right? So we did, for example, a study a long time back in Vietnam where I used to spend a good number of years. What do you do against sea level rise in the Mekong Delta? You have two choices. Either you build dikes, a lot of great infrastructure, very expensive, you need technology from the West and whatnot, or you can restore the mangroves, which also happens to be sort of the place where the fish, shrimps, and other rich biodiversity comes from. It's much cheaper and it's much more sustainable. So, I mean, for me, hands down, this is something we need to do from many dimensions. On climate finance, yes, we promised 100 billion as a world community. Are we there? Not completely. If you look at the DAC OECD, we are at about 80 billion, so we're still falling short. What are we doing in the Netherlands? We report on this every year to the DAC OECD. We are currently just over 1 billion annually that we do in climate finance, half of which comes from the public budget, half of which through the public budget we leverage with the private sector. So we see the private sector very much as a motor, as an innovator, and as a scaler, as a conveyor belt to go faster. I think what is unique in the Netherlands, which is also the reason why we hosted the Climate Adaptation Summit, many countries put a lot of their money in mitigation, so in renewable energy, in forest, incredibly important, and we do that too. But from poor people's perspective, adapting to irreversible climate change is incredibly important. Drought-resistant seed, drip irrigation systems. So half of our money goes to adaptation, half of our money goes to mitigation. In most donor countries, it is about 90% mitigation, max 10% adaptation. So we do things differently. We do it for a reason, because we take inequality, vulnerabilities as our entry point for policy decisions. On mental health and social care. Look, this has been a big priority of the ministry. We looked at it particularly from an angle of how can you recreate social tissue after war, after conflict, after trauma that people have lived through, humanitarian crisis, refugee crisis. But I know from reading literature that climate depression is now an acknowledged terminology by psychiatry, because young people are suffering from climate depression. We haven't focused on this. I will be honest, it's not part of our program. I'll see what we can do and how we deal with that. More important for me is to actually avoid that we have more people with climate depression. So for me, that's two things: keeping up the work that we do on climate. Second, really and seriously investing in youth So Aoife, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, we need to listen to the voice of youth. And Pedro, in your report, I pick up 3 things: its agency, its norms, and incentives. Well, if we give youth a voice, then that means we also have to give them a little bit of agency, because I am sick and tired of the tokenism that we have one young person who can say how important, really important, oh yes, really very important young people are, and subsequently all the adults like me do exactly what they did before, right? That's the reality of youth representation that we have seen for many, many decades. We have changed that. We have a youth ambassador now. We have a youth advisory commission, which importantly isn't just Dutch youth, but is youth from the countries where we work, poor people. Let them tell me what we need to do. What are their needs? What do I know about their needs? So let's have that conversation. Let me be inspired by what they want. I won't be able to meet all those needs, but I do want to know much better from the field reality up what it is that their priorities are. So we give them agency. I think it's also incredibly important that we allow young people to shape the norms, right? It is the norms that will shape our behavior. And if the norms of my generation continue to dominate policy, frankly, guys, we're doomed, right? So in ensuring that they not just have a place at the table, but that they are given the agency to set the norms of tomorrow's society is incredibly important. For me, this morning, I had a conversation with one of the youth representatives, and she said, well, look, you've worked in the world of science for so long. Aren't you losing hope? Aren't you getting tired of all this? You've been at it for 30 plus years. And I said, look, yes, I'm tired. I'm fed up. I don't think we're going fast enough. But the last thing that we can do is lose hope, because if we lose hope, we lose the chance for people that are not around this table, that depend on some of us, to get that perspective and to hold on to that dream of a life in dignity and achieving the SDGs. So keep at it and keep us sharp, young people. The third point I wanted to make is around incentives. I think Maria mentioned this. I think economic incentives are incredibly, incredibly important. For me, I see business really as the motor to do this much faster than most governments can do. Most governments are driven by a relatively short-term horizon, right? That's the nature of politics. Every cycle of 3 to 4 years, businesses are in there for the long run. And so working with businesses to set the norms and ask the governments to set those norms, for example, on carbon prices, is actually going to help us move faster and more decisively. I think it was also Maria who mentioned the social innovation that we need, our mindset. I think, look, this really is on us, right? This is what we shape together. This is our bubble. And when I looked at this report, Pedro, I was thinking, God, this is the 30th anniversary, right, of the Human Development Report. I remember that because I was in New York in 1990. Now, the 25th birthday is silver, the 50th birthday is gold, but the 30th birthday, I didn't know that, actually is the pearl. Did you know that? You celebrate that with a pearl. Well, to me, this report is the pearl of wisdom. I think this really is high time we then also take it quite seriously. I find it quite shocking that with all our wisdom, all our norms, all the innovation that we have, we still haven't reached nirvana, even as the richest, most developed countries with all the collective knowledge that we have. That's incredible, right? But it's not set in stone. Yes, we're hitting a concrete wall, but it's still not set in stone. Our future isn't. So as we shape it and as we think of how we move forward, I just wanted to leave you with my favorite quote, and some of you may have heard it before, because this is about painting the picture of the future and being inspired. I think that is what we need most of all. And Michelangelo is one of my favorite painters, and he used to say, the greatest danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but rather in setting our aim too low and achieving the mark. And when it comes to poverty eradication and keeping that dream alive, that everybody in this world deserves a life of dignity, then we cannot put that dream and that bar for all of us high enough. And for that, we're going to need business, we're going to need local governments, we're going to need young people, we're going to need the UN, we're going to need everybody in this bubble. And not tomorrow, but now. So I hope that with all of us together, if we can't do it, guys, who can? So put the pressure up, hold our feet to the fire, hold politicians' feet to the fire, and keep it up because we're losing time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ulrike and Kitty, for your closing remarks. I'm sure they inspired everyone to keep hope, to contribute even more to the future we want and also the balance we need. In order to expand our bubble, you can go to the website duurzaamregeerakkoord.nl, sign the petition for a sustainable coalition agreement and share it with your friends and also with your enemies so that we can pull everyone into that bubble. Many thanks to UNDP for organizing this event and to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to my team at SDG the Netherlands for their support in co-organizing this event. Special thanks, of course, to our speakers and members of the panel. And finally, in particular, to the audience for participating so actively. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the ice, the snow, and the great weather, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marisa and everyone.
Bye. Thank you.